Good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study here at Faith Baptist Church's Facebook Live and YouTube Live. And we're so very glad to have everybody with us this evening. I don't have any updates for you. I don't have any new prayer requests for you. So if you guys have something, leave a comment. I will do my best to read it for everybody as we go through our lesson today. So like I said, I don't have any new things, so we're just going to run right into our Bible study. Jump into our Bible cam. Make sure you guys can hear and make sure you can see. Of course, the Facebook people can't see. I promise it's working fine. I test it and make sure that it's working and everything's fine just before we go live. And then I go live and it never works right. And I don't know why that is. There we go. So we should be good now. We're continuing our series through the Hall of Faith. Pull everything back up. And last week we talked about verse 30, which says, "By faith the walls of Jericho fell down as they were compassed about 7 days." And we talked about the walls of Jericho in Joshua 6. This week we're in verse 31, which says, "By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace." So this week we're in verse 31, and we're talking about the harlot Rahab, and we're going to be in Joshua chapter 2. And you might be thinking, "Pastor, why are we in chapter 2 this week if we were in chapter 9 last week?" Well, because the Hall of Faith, Hebrews 11, it kind of goes backwards-ish. Not really, and we'll see that sort of toward the end of our lesson. We kind of saw it last week. We read about them pulling Rahab and her house out before the walls fell, and they were like sieging the town and so forth. But we're going to be talking about Rahab this week. So we're going to be in Joshua chapter 2. I will warn you, there are going to be moments in this study today that are not going to be what you might call family friendly. The nature of Rahab and who she was before is going to touch on some sensitive subjects, and we will be using some words that very young kids maybe might not know the meaning of. So all biblical, and I'm not going to go out of my way to be grotesque or anything. We're just going to be talking about the Bible. So if you have any questions or anything along the way, leave a comment. I'll do my best to see it, but I'm working with one monitor today, so it's going to be a little bit harder for me to see your comments. Okay, there we go. That should be good now. Excuse me. Okay, so let's jump over to Joshua chapter 2. In Joshua chapter 2, it says, "And Joshua the son of Nun," good evening, Amanda, "sent out of Shittim two men to spy secretly, saying, 'Go view the land, even Jericho.' And they went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, 'Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country.' And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, 'Bring forth the men that are come to thee.'" Good evening again. "Which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country.' And the woman took the two men and hid them, and said thus, 'There came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were.' And it came to pass about the time of shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whether the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan under the fords. And as soon as they which pursued after them were gone out, they shut the gate." So we see this first bit is what I'm calling the blessed lie this evening. And we're going to touch on something controversial, but something that's true, and Christians are going to have to get used to it. So we see in verse 1, it introduces us to Rahab. We get introduced to Rahab, and we get to know that she is a harlot. into a harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. So these two men were sent to spy out the land, and they go to Jericho to spy out Jericho. And along the way, they seek to hide out. And a harlot is and I've had plenty of warning at this point, a harlot is a sex worker. She's a professional, she's a prostitute. And that is what she is, and that is what she does. And so this is the woman they chose to go into this house of to not get caught by the by the king of Jericho and so forth, and his men and the guards of the city and so forth, whatever you want to call them. And so what we see is the woman herself. And we see these men going into her house. And we see a lot of these Christian sort of hypocrisies that have become sort of commonplace, complacent, and accepted in a lot of our Christian culture, a lot of our church atmosphere, being challenged by even this first verse. I have heard Christians and pastors of all walks of life say you should be very careful the kind of places you go, and you should be very careful the kind of people you speak to, because someone might assume that you're there to do something that you're not actually there to do, and you would never want your good being evil spoken of. They say, oh, you shouldn't go to the movie theater as a Christian. Some churches do. And they say, well, because somebody might assume you're going to see a bad movie, and you never want your good being evil spoken of. And, oh, they went into this place and that place serves alcohol, and you shouldn't go into a place that serves alcohol because someone might assume you're there to drink alcohol, and you'd never want your good being evil spoken of. And and that verse that the good being evil spoken of, they're taking out of context and twisting it and contorting it to make it mean something that they don't want it to mean. Basically, these things are political, is what it boils down to. Not going to a movie theater is a political movement by Christian politicians because the movie theaters started to promote certain liberal things, and so that was our excuse to not give them our money, is what that came down to. That's what it was in the long run. Alcoholism, we don't want to give them our money, all that sort of a thing. And so their solution to that is never go anywhere near these places. So that's not an accurate solution, and that's not even God's way. It's just not. So for two people of God's people, two people faithful to the Lord and to worshiping the one true God of heaven, to go into the house of a harlot challenges that, doesn't it? Of all the houses they could have gone into, they went into the house of this prostitute and received help from her. And she did actually help them. Now, there's a lot of Christians I know that if they were in that situation would have said, no, we can't accept help from her. We need to find, someone with stronger morals than that. You don't know what kind of morals that she has, right? And so these judgments that we have on people, they're not biblical. And we've tricked the world into thinking that our judgments are biblical, and so they hate the Bible as much as they hate us. And they think that Jesus is what we are, so they wind up hating the Lord because we misrepresent him. The fact of the matter is that Rahab was God's kind of people. And these snooty, pretentious, busybody snobs that traipse about these churches with a wallet full of money, telling the pastor to do whatever they want him to do, they're not God's people. And that's just the fact of it. And we're going to have to get used to that. Also, another difficult thing is in verse 3, they said to bring forth the men that are come to thee. So for men that are sent to spy out the land for their leader, this is their worst fear. They get caught. Now the entire kingdom's out looking for them. And if they do get caught, they'll be killed. But nothing else wonderful can come from this story for Israel or for Rahab until these two spies went through this incredible fear first. And, and sometimes the things we worry about do come to pass. So sometimes, oh, not being able to pay that bill, or, oh man, something happens to the car, or, just problems, or, oh, the kids are having trouble at school, and you worry about these things happening, and sometimes they do wind up actually happening, and you think, oh my gosh, why is this happening to me? Like I tried to do everything and try to make sure this wouldn't happen, and it happened anyways. And so sometimes the things we worry about do actually come to pass. But instead of letting yourself fill with dread and worry, you ought to just trust that the Lord's leading you somewhere. That there's a purpose for this, right? That it's driving you to a place of faith, or it's driving you, forcing you into a decision that's going to wind up being better for you in the long run, right? So these things are leading us somewhere, and the path might be scary, but it's going to have an even better destination. For example, the Bible says in Psalm 66, verse 10, "For thou, O God, has proved us. Thou hast tried us as silver tried. Thou broughtest us into the net. Thou laidest affliction upon our loins. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, but thou broughtest us out into a wealthy place." So we're going through this path that's leading us, to be driven on top of and be trampled on top of, and it's bringing us through the fire and through the water and all these various kinds of trials. But when we pass through the other side of these trials, you'll bring us into a place of great wealth and prosperity and so forth. And that is what God is sometimes trying to do for us when these things happen to us. They bring us about to an even greater place. So nothing wonderful could happen from the story until this really scary thing first happened. We also see said in verse 5, Rahab says the phrase, "Whither the men went, I wot not." In other words, where the men went, I don't know. I don't know where those two spies went. I have no idea where they could be. This was absolutely 100% a lie. There's no way around that fact. Rahab just lied. Now, there is no commandment, and a lot of people get confused about this that say that thou shalt not lie. That is not a commandment. The commandment says thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Right? So the phrasing of that is very important. What that verse is talking about is bearing a false witness, but doing so against your neighbor, in conflict, in opposition. You're trying to cause problems for them, or maybe you're trying to help yourself and incidentally causing problems for them, but it's against that other person, right? So that is very important to understand. The Bible also says that lying lips are an abomination unto the Lord. And you ever wonder why it says lying lips and not just lying is an abomination unto the Lord? And some people might say, well, it's an indication as to the lips themselves. But don't we always say that God hates the sin and not the sinner? So how can that be? The fact of the matter is, using the phrase lying lips is more than just poetry for no reason whatsoever. The lying lips are lips that are accustomed to lying. They're in the habit of lying. They lie all the time for everything because it's quickest and easiest and it gets the job done, and we don't really care who we hurt in the process. So those are lying lips and not just lying, because we see here with Rahab that she's blessed for this lie. This lie did a lot of good for God's people and for her. And she would go on, as we read last week, to be rewarded for it. So, in contrast to this, we want to look at Abram maybe. And when Abram lied about his wife in the land of Egypt. And when he did that, that was a sin. When Sarah told Jesus that she did not laugh, that lie was also a sin. But is that because lying is inherently sinful at its nature, or is it the selfish and uncaring way that we lie which makes it a sin? The moments where lying is okay are far and few between. This was a matter of life and death, in which Rahab could either lie or let the spies just die at the hands of the king of Jericho. What matters to God is your heart, right? He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin, right? Intention matters to God. Are you intending to do a selfless thing and help somebody out or not? Think of it like this. If you're in World War II Germany, That's where you live. And you're living in one of the worst places and one of the worst times in human history. And you're trying to help out this Jewish family that's living with you, and they're hiding out up in your attic. And you have a Nazi soldier knock on your door. And you answer the door, and they ask you, do you know where any Jews are? In that moment, is the right thing to do to lie or to tell the truth? You see, the devil's not always going to play fair. He's not always going to make it so easy for you to follow the rule book. Sometimes it's going to get a little complicated. And you say, well, how do we know what's true and what's not true? This is how you do that, okay? And this is why I use this lying thing as an example. Because we Christians for years have been just letting other people do our thinking for us. So a preacher tells us that lying is a sin, and that no matter what, anytime you tell a lie, that's a sin. And we let him do the thinking for us, and we just go, oh, okay, sure, yeah. Don't do that. Think for yourselves, read it yourself, and come to your own conclusions. Don't come to my conclusions. Don't just take this lesson and swallow it and move on with your day. Take some time, read it for yourself. Figure out what you believe about it. Because it's not that lying is a sin. It's dishonesty and selfishness. Those things are sin. It's the uncaring and self-centered way that we lie that makes it a sin. Do we strive to be honest people? Or do we try to utilize lies and deception in order to get what we want? You know, the only road that has no traffic problem is the straight and narrow. You follow the straight and narrow, you'll never get lost. But there's going to be signs along the way that try to trick you into saying, oh, this is a shortcut, go this way. Or, oh, this way is the real way, don't keep going on the straight. And you're going to have to determine for yourself, what does the Bible have to say? What does the Lord think about these things? Don't just let us make your decisions for you. Read the Bible yourself. That's how you can know the difference between right and wrong. Let the Lord teach you himself. And then it says in verse 6 that she had brought them up to the roof of the house. So not only did she lie for them, but she also gave them a safe place to hide. This spot, it's possible, had been used in the past for less pure reasons, right? Let's say a jealous wife is looking for their husband. And in her profession, either her or other people have probably had less than reputable reasons for hiding there. If you think about it, that's probably how she knew what to do so quickly. But now, it's being used for something good. You know, I used to think that in order for something to be used of God, it had to be something that was always used for good intentions. But I have since learned that some things that the world uses for evil, God can use for good. God is in the business of redeeming. And thank God he didn't decide to use this policy that some have adopted, or none of us would have a hope of getting to heaven. Imagine never allowing yourself to participate or be involved in anything that was once impure or unholy. If God had that policy, nobody could ever get saved. We're born with sin natures. And if God had the same policy that some Christians have about Halloween and Harry Potter, then none of us could ever be saved. Because, by the way, no, Halloween was once called All Hallows Eve, and it was never a holiday to worship the devil. It was never that. It was a holiday called All Hallows Eve, where people believed that the spirits of the dead rose. This was by the way, holiday worshipped by Catholics as well. And they believed that the spirits of the dead rose, and before they would haunt your house or demons would come and plague your house, you would offer them a treat. And you would almost like a sacrifice, and you'd put it in front of your house for the ghosts and stuff wandering around, and that if you left that treat out for them, they wouldn't haunt you or bother you on that day. So That's where we get Halloween from. And when you went to go out on All Hallows Eve, you would need to dress up like a ghost so that the other ghosts wouldn't know that you were a regular human and they wouldn't attack you or haunt you. That's where Halloween costumes come in. You know, that's... Excuse me. I had a bit of a sneeze. Anyway, that's where all that comes from. But even if it was less than pure than that, it's okay to let your kids dress up like superheroes and go get candy around the neighborhood. Right? If we had this idea that, well, this was once used for less than, holy purposes, so we can never have anything to do with it, well, why don't we think about before we were saved? Right? Does that thinking really track with biblical thinking? And if you have any reason other than biblical reasons for it, I don't care. Stop pretending like that's God's rule. Right? Because if you're going to come around and say, well, it's not very Christian. Well, if it's not coming out of the Bible, then it's got nothing to do with whether or not it's Christian. What you want to say is it's not very conservative. Right? It doesn't align with your political beliefs. But stop pretending like it doesn't align with your religious beliefs. There is no religious verse in Scripture that has anything to do with Halloween being bad or sinful. Well, little girls dress up like witches. They don't dress up like Wiccan witches. Because Wiccan witches worship the earth and the goddesses of the earth. And they worship sort of, it's almost like Mother Nature. Putting air quotes on that one too. And it's not, the Bugs Bunny cartoons with the double toil and trouble where she's trying to chop up Bugs Bunny, It's not, the Harry Potter where they're, levitating feathers and troll, clubs and stuff like that. That's not the same thing. Well, they're dressing up like ghosts and goblins and stuff. Okay, well, we believe ghosts don't exist, right? When a soul perishes, it doesn't dwell on the earth. So I really don't see the harm. Well, they're dressing up like skeletons. That one's an actual thing. Skeletons are real. They exist. They're inside our bodies. I'm still not seeing a problem. If any of you guys can contest me on this Halloween thing, leave a comment. I would be glad to destroy you in the comments because you're wrong about this thing. And it is this concept of, oh, well, this is less than pure at one point, so we can't. And it's like, what were we? So this thing of they brought it up to the roof, and now God has redeemed it, and he redeems us. Romans 5:8 says, but God commendeth his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't wait for you to become a good person before he started caring about you. He cared about you before you were a good person and then converted you by his salvation on the cross. Right? So we're going through this and we're learning some things about even ourselves in this day and age and the nature of the kind of people that God has used throughout Scripture. Right? But then we see in verses 8 through 14, we see this sort of blessed oath. Right? So she helps them, and as they're leaving, she came unto them upon the roof, and she said unto them, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us. And all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. So even they have heard about the amazing things that God did for them in Egypt. And as soon as we had heard these things, our heart did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God, in heaven above and in earth beneath. Now, therefore, I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, and that you will save alive my father and my mother, and my brethren and my sisters, and all they that have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men answered, our life for yours, if ye utter not this our business, and it shall be. When the Lord hath given us this land, we will deal kindly and truly with thee. So they make this promise. right? They swear to you, we will deal kindly and truly with thee. These two spies promised to deal both kindly and truly with Rahab. This was for two reasons. Number one, because they are God's people, and that is how God's people ought to behave. Right? Somebody did a kindness for them, and they will do a kindness for those people back. But also, when somebody treats you poorly and treats you like dirt and then comes to you for help, you still have to help them if you're a Christian. Right? Because that's what Jesus told us to do. And you might not want to do it, but that's tough tamales, Tin Man. You're a Christian. You have got to do it anyways. You say, why? Why do I have to? Bless them that curse you, love them that hate you, and do good to them that despitefully use you. Now listen, you don't have to do it, but you got to do the rest of us a favor and stop going around telling other people that you're a Christian. Because you're not behaving as a Christian, as a Christ-like person. You might be saved, you might be on your way to heaven, but if you're going to bear the name of Christ out there in the world, you've got to behave like Christ. You know, this is how God's people ought to behave. And secondly, because Rahab had also dealt with them using kindness and honesty. And it's a sad truth that's true far too often. Those that know the Lord the least honor him better than many that knows him the best. Rahab barely knew the name of God and knew nothing else about him. But she obeyed his commands better than those that stood at the base of Sinai themselves. This harlot, this prostitute living on the wall of the city, obeyed the Lord and helped out more and was more faithful to the ways of God than those that stood at the base of Sinai when Moses was receiving the Ten Commandments. I mean, they did things at the base of Sinai that let's just say they were having too good a time at the base of Sinai. There's not a whole lot of clothing involved, and you could just imagine. And so it's just crazy to me, but it's still true even to this day. But the Bible says in Colossians 3:11, whether there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering. These are the definitions of those. These ought to be the defining traits of Christians. And we don't have a lot of this. Well, what are our defining traits as Christians? Well, we don't listen to rap. Why? Well, we don't like the Democrat president. Why? We list these modernized political versions of what people have been told it means to be a Christian, but people have no idea. Folks, read it for yourself. Come to your own conclusions. Christ is all and in all. Therefore, put on, therefore, as the elect of God, that God chose you to be a part of his family. Holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, that we should be the natural inheritors of all those things that Christ embodies here on the earth. And then we see, lastly, is the blessed harlot. In verse 15 through verse 21, that all the blessings, that when they come back and they're going to save her, and we see the scarlet thread in verse 18, and bring thy father, mother, and brethren, and father's household home unto thee, and whosoever shall go out the doors of thy house of thy street, his blood shall be upon his head. So in other words, everybody who's in your house, they will be safe. And we talked about the archaeology of Jericho last week. And it's interesting because we did talk about that one section of wall that didn't fall over when everything else did. And we believe that that was, in fact, Rahab's house. That was where she was. And that's why God said anybody who's in that place, when the walls come tumbling down, they will be safe. But anybody who chooses of their own will to leave that place, let their death be upon their own head. In other words. And that's why, is because all the other places the walls came in and fell in on the city, but not there where her house was. And that's one. So that's always an interesting little thing. And they're talking about how they're going to keep their oath. And they departed, and she bound the scarlet line in the window. So she says to them in verse 16, "Get you to the mountain." And so she's telling them how to hide from the soldiers of Jericho and keep themselves safe until it's time to return home. And that's what she means by that. So not only did she help them hide, but she's also helping them escape their pursuers. The help that she offered before led her to make a deal with the Israelite spies to keep her and her family safe, but this was extra. And it was after her deal was already made. You know, I'd bet that most people would think that a woman who worked as a harlot and lived on the outer wall of the city would be hardened by life and only be looking out for herself. But Rahab seemed to be an incredibly caring woman, despite what probably was a pretty hard life. We have a bad habit of judging people based on the few facts about them that we know. Like what kind of job they have. We judge people off of where they live. We judge people off of what they look like, and boy, do we. But God would have us keep an open mind until we get to know the heart of a person, right? She says in verse 18, "Thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread," or they said to her, "Bind this line of scarlet thread in the window thou didst lead by." And this scarlet thread would go on to be the saving grace of many people that lived in Jericho, because all the people in her house were brought out to safety. Just like these two spies promised her. You know, so this scarlet thread is an incredible promise of salvation, and it pictures Christ in the same way. That it's an incredible promise of the Savior that would come. And you'd say, well, it seems a bit of a stretch to me to use a woman like Rahab to picture Christ. You're wrong. You're 100% wrong. You'd say, well, Pastor, I really don't think I am. I mean, one was pretty pure and one was a prostitute. Matthew chapter 1 gives us the genealogy of Christ. And in chapter 5, it says, "And Salmon begat Booz of Rechab. And Booz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king." Rechab, R-A-C-H-A-B, translates to Hebrew the name Rahab. This woman was not only allowed to become a part of Israel, Rahab became a part of the bloodline of Jesus. She was a part of his royal, divine, holy bloodline. And by the way, his bloodline, the only one in human history that was ever a truly divine bloodline. All other royal bloodlines, they're man-made. We made those royal bloodlines. Christ is the only true divine bloodline. And in it, you find women like Rahab. Not pious, nose stuck up in the air, I'm too good for Halloween kind of women, but a prostitute who is humble enough to find the salvation of God. Changed her life and did everything she could to live a life pleasing unto God. That's what God's looking for. Not the pride that has come to define our Christian faith in this day and age, but the humility and the repentance and the compassion of a person like Rahab. Well, that is our lesson for this evening. We're done pretty early, but we didn't have a whole lot to talk about beforehand either. But I want to thank anybody who was here at all for this lesson, and for those of you who are going to be watching the VOD afterwards, I'm sure. There I am. But again, I want to thank you guys so much. Be sure to leave a like and a comment on this video. Let me know if you have any questions, if you enjoyed this or not, you know, that sort of a thing. And we'll be back on Sunday morning for our Sunday school lesson on finding fruit in the fables of faith. So until then, guys.